Hey there, it's Silver. This is Worldless. So this is a Metroidvania that uses turn-based combat, which is unusual for the genre for sure. The only game I can currently think of off the top of my head that does that is Monster Sanctuary, which is a fantastic game, but this is going for something very different. And in fact, the combat almost doesn't feel turn-based, which is interesting. It's very actiony. But the first thing to talk about is the game in like an audio-visual sense in its presentation and stuff, because it's quite unique looking. It uses a method of animation and stuff for its characters that's really smooth and has a lot of character to it because they don't have any like facial expressions or anything like that that you can use to convey emotion, so they have to do all of that via movement instead. Because as you'll notice, pretty much everything from the characters to the environments are made of very abstract shapes. We've got some geometric and some abstract shapes, I should say, that kind of make up everything. In fact, your character is a bit like Rayman in the sense that you don't have arms or legs, or really even a defined body. Instead, having everything made out of just these collections of shapes. But despite being very sort of minimalist in terms of its art for characters, like I said, it manages to make them have a lot of charm because of how detailed and smooth the animation is, so you can actually read stuff like body language, which is kind of funny if you think about the fact that they don't really have much of a body, but they somehow make it work. And this extends to the environment. The areas themselves also have a very unique look to them, being abstract, beautiful vistas with a lot of odd shapes and interesting atmospheres. This is pretty important because a lot of what you're going to be doing in the game is exploration. You are encouraged to go to every corner of everything you can see for a couple of reasons. So this means that you're going to be looking at these big sweeping vistas and stuff for a long time, so they need to be, interesting looking to keep you going, and they definitely are. Every different area of the game, which is divided into these sort of branches, which I'll explain in a minute, it looks different, and they all have their own enemy encounters and their own secrets to find and all that stuff, and many of them also even have their own puzzles and things to solve in terms of progressing through the areas. This means that each one just feels very different from each other, and this is helpful for exploration because being a Metroidvania, you are going to be backtracking and stuff through some of these areas to find some stuff that you couldn't previously get to and that sort of thing. So remembering where all of this is important, so having these areas be very visually defined and separate from each other is helpful in that regard. But of course, in addition to all of that, you've also got the music, and the music in this game is very pretty, just as pretty as the environments. It's got this sort of haunting, exploratory vibe that is lonely, deliberately so, and also quite mysterious. And each area, of course, has its own musical theme that tends to match very well with its visual themes, but overall you could say that the tone of the music is lonely in this game. But that loneliness also kind of gives way to like a wanderlust as you're exploring, and the music does tend to swell and stuff at particular moments and even outside of combat, which does sort of help to define these moments where large vistas appear and stuff like that, that it gives each area its own sort of audiovisual vibe that is simultaneously very pretty and also quite lonely. So mechanically, the game does a pretty interesting thing in the way that it teaches you and allows you to explore. Basically, there's very little text in this game. There's dialogue and stuff at certain points, and there are some basic tutorial windows that pop up and stuff that help to teach you the basics, but outside of that, most of what you're doing is via experimentation. It sort of gives you the tools and expects you to experiment with them to learn how everything works. You'll often come across stuff that you don't know exactly what it does, and the game does not actually tell you. Purposefully so, it doesn't deign to explain every little feature of the world to you, and instead expect you to just sort of poke it and see what happens. This means that the game is very heavily based around exploration and experimentation, where you're just sort of going to every corner of every area you can see, as well as just poking everything just to see what it does. And this will also extend to the combat, which is a very free-form combat system where you're expected to adhere to certain rules that the game has to help you understand, but a lot of it is very much based around your own sort of expression, and through fighting each enemy sometimes multiple times, you'll eventually learn the most sort of efficient ways to actually combat them. So the exploration is split into these like biomes basically, and each one has a map, but the map in this game is also very abstract. It looks like a constellation, and instead of being a detailed Metroidvania map that shows you the topography of the area you're in, instead it's just a sequence of nodes connected to each other in a way that looks like a constellation, and each node is sort of an area where something can happen. And then you'll notice when you open the map that every area is one of these constellations of various shapes, and each one has its own audio-visual theme, and these are the areas that you're going to be exploring. And the game is pretty open. You won't have all of these open at first, but you'll have many of them open from the start, and more will open up as you explore. And you have a sort of portal system that allows you to sort of fast travel between each of these unlocked tracks of biomes, but you can also go from in a more like organic way where they all connect via these tunnels to each other. And each of these nodes, each of these sort of stars on the constellation map is an event, as I mentioned, usually combat, although not always, because the way the game's progression works is heavily tied into the rest of it. You have this skill tree that also looks like a constellation, and this skill tree is based around these two different kinds of skill points, these round blue ones and these diamond-shaped orange ones. And also later in the game you'll find these green ones they work a little bit differently, and there are only a few of them, but the way that it works is when you get to one of these nodes, there will be either a body, like a body of an enemy somewhere that you can actually get to, usually via some sort of platforming challenge, and then interact with in order to get one of these points, or it'll be an enemy and you have to actually beat them and absorb them in order to get one of these points. And then once you get whatever point is on that star, that node of the tree, then that will fill in on the map and you can go on to the next one and continue throughout the areas until you collect all of them and get to whatever it is that the story actually wants you to get to as well. These will have their own little markers that will explain more about the world and what's actually happening as you go. And then eventually you will get your second half. At first you're playing as this white and blue being that has the ability to jump once and also dash through the air, and they can even dash straight upwards as sort of like a replacement for a double jump. And they'll also gain the ability to dash above water and stuff so that they can actually walk across surfaces of water and get to the other side. But eventually you'll find this black and orange being and absorb it and become one, so you can actually just press the trigger to switch between in real time whenever you want. And the other being has a completely different set of combat mechanics as well as different capabilities. They have a double jump as well as lacking the dash, but instead being able to go below water and not get damaged and stuff by rain. And there's also some other stuff that you'll unlock. Occasionally as you get to these various story bits and explore some of the areas, you'll find these sort of other remains of these strange creatures that will give you new powers. And some of these creatures are also alive and will speak to you and help to convey some of the story to you. I'm not entirely sure what they are yet. They seem to be kind of like skeletal looking, at least what this art style would depict as skeletal. They almost look like ASCII art, so they're pretty cool looking. But of course, yeah, we've got the combat. So the combat system is really interesting in this game. It's a lot of fun. It feels very fluid and fast despite being turn-based. So the way that it works is on your turn, you have a sort of time gauge beneath your character that is constantly depleting. And as long as you have this gauge, you can press different buttons to attack in different ways. So it's got like a sort of character action combat system kind of thing going on. And then once this gauge depletes, it becomes the enemy's turn. Well, they will do something and you'll be able to respond, usually with some sort of block or dodge. And then it'll eventually become your turn again, and it will continue until one of you gets destroyed. This is a game very much about trial and error in the sense that there isn't really like a death system. Instead of like dying and reloading, you simply get shoved back and you can immediately start the combat again from the beginning. So there's very little downtime, even if you lose. But the interesting thing is you're not actually looking to destroy the enemies per se, you're actually looking to absorb them, because this is how you permanently get rid of them and actually get one of the skill points. There will be black and orange enemies that give you the orange skill points, as well as blue and white enemies that give you the blue skill points. And the white and blue ones don't actually have health gauges, and instead you have to absorb them. The only way to beat them is to absorb them, whereas the orange and black ones do actually have a health gauge, but you still need to absorb them. This makes them a little bit more difficult sometimes because you can actually kill them on accident before you get a chance to absorb them, at which point you can respawn them whenever you want in order to try it again, and only when you finally absorb them will they actually disappear completely. So during combat, you'll see this circular gauge in the bottom right of the screen. And this is your absorption gauge, and this is what you need to max out in order to absorb them. Once this is, well, you don't necessarily have to max it out, I suppose. You got to get it to a certain threshold that'll be marked with a line on the gauge. Although the higher it is, the better your luck will be, because when you actually go to absorb an enemy, you will get a selection of 4 button presses, and you got to press them all in the right order, but also in very quick succession. You don't have very long to do this. And the lower the absorption gauge is when you actually go to do this, some of the buttons will have question marks on them, and you got to guess what the button is. is in order to actually do it. So you want the gauge to be as high as possible so that you know more of the button presses and you can do it all in one go, preferably. And when it's your turn, you've got several different things you can do. Both characters, you can switch in combat, by the way, between both of the characters. They both have their own unique melee combos, and these have a couple of different uses because you can do things like knock enemies into the air and juggle them and stuff like that, as well as when a bunch of them connect in a row, the part of your character will start to glow, and you can actually unleash this as a sort of special attack that usually does a lot of damage, or if used in the correct scenario, will do a whole bunch of absorption damage and stuff. And all skills that you can use do have both damage and absorption damage values. So some of them are better at health gauge damage and some are better at the absorption gauge, and you've got to use them at the right time. But in addition to all of your various melee attacks, you've also got some magic attacks, and each of the characters has a different set. Your blue character has lightning and ice spells, and the orange character has fire and wind. And the relevance of this is that oftentimes enemies will have a weakness to a specific element, and you have to actually get that weakness multiple times in a row in order to sort of shatter a shield. And once this is broken, you'll do double damage to their absorption gauge. So you want to do this. You want to use whatever they're weak to until you can break their barriers, and then unleash all of your heavy absorption damage stuff once this gauge is multiplied so that you can have a better chance at filling it up. And using the points that you get on each character's skill trees, which are separate from each other, by the way, and you've got to use points for each. So by the time you get your second character, you will have to actually divide the points and decide who you want to advance. But of the various things that you can unlock with these points, you can get extended combos as well as those special charged attacks. You can enhance your magic attacks to have different charged forms that do different types of damage, as well as several other more specialty attacks. Like, for instance, the black and orange character can get this ranged whip attack that allows you to do melee damage without actually coming into melee range, which is important for some enemies that will do like a counterattack if you do. But importantly, each character also has a completely different method of defense. The blue character is a little bit more defense focused. They have shields, and they have both a physical and a magical shield. Whenever an enemy attacks, it will flash either a vertical or a horizontal beam across the screen, and this tells you what type of attack they're about to use. And if you shield it at the right time, then you can get a sort of perfect shield effect, which will completely deflect the attack. If you don't shield it at the right time, but still have your shield up, well, the right shield up, then it will still prevent you from taking damage, but it'll start to crack the shields, and you can't hold them forever. So the blue character has definitely a defensive focus, able to completely negate damage with well-timed shields as long as you're using the right shield for the right type of attack. How you can even do it multiple times in like really quick succession, which you will have to master sometimes because enemies might have like 3 vertical flashes, which shows you they're about to unleash 3 magical attacks in quick succession, and you gotta time each shield just right to be able to deflect them all. This character also gets a special sort of deflection move once you purchase it in the skill tree, where once you deflect a certain number of attacks with perfect shields, their own shield will start to glow, and you can then hold a button down to actually prepare a special shield attack that will either deflect a physical hit or a special hybrid attack. These will flash with like a plus or a cross shape. And you can deflect one of those with the shield in order to do like a huge amount of absorption damage to the enemy if you time it right. And it also allows you to just automatically deflect those things rather than having to time a normal shield at just the right time. So it's like a powerful move that you build up to. The orange character, on the other hand, does not have shields. Instead, they have a block, and the block works with both physical and magical attacks and halves the damage from whatever they get hit by. So they can't prevent damage, but they can take half. And eventually on their skill tree, they'll gain the ability to, if you stop guarding right after you take a hit with just the right timing, you will send off a sort of magical projectile that deals some of the damage proportional to what you took back at the enemy. And you can even do this in rapid succession if you keep like sort of perfect guarding hits. You'll still take damage, but you'll at least do some absorption damage back in return. And they also have a dodge, and this dodge is sort of like a blink. It makes them disappear in place for just a second, and if you time it just right, then you can completely avoid taking damage at all. But you can't use it rapidly, so it's mostly used for big single attacks. So you put all this together, and it means that the combat in this game is really engaging. It's very fast-paced and fun. It's super skill-based because it's all based around like timings and using the correct elements at the correct time and all that sort of stuff. You've got a lot of moving parts because you have all these various abilities, and as you expand each of the character skill trees, they'll get even more abilities on more buttons and things that you can remember. So you'll have some pretty advanced combos and stuff that you can do eventually. And once you reach a certain point in the story and you start being able to get those green skill points I mentioned, you can use those to enhance sort of partner abilities, and eventually these will allow you to do things like switch out characters mid-combo. So the very fast-paced nature of the combat, combined with the fact that if you lose, either by killing the enemy before you absorb them, which is sort of like a loss, or you just simply get your health depleted and you get shoved back, the fact that you can immediately start again if you want to means that there's pretty much no downtime at all in this game, and if you want to keep fighting, you can just keep fighting right there and just keep bashing your head against the wall of a tough enemy until you either it clicks and you beat them, or if you decide maybe it's a little bit too much, you can go to one of the other areas in the game and get some more skill points of various kinds and enhance your characters a bit before you try again. So overall, I would say Worldless is a very addicting game. It's got this really addicting quality to its combat because of its fast pace and its many moving parts that make it feel kind of like a character action game. It's a little bit like a turn-based Devil May Cry combat system in a way. It's a really fun idea. And the fact that, of course, everything is so abstract and interesting to explore also helps because you're not always doing combat. You need a lot of interesting stuff to see in the downtime between combat sections as well. And there's a lot of little puzzles to find and collectibles to get and secrets to come across and stuff like that too. So this is a really well-rounded game, I would say, with a fun combat system and some great exploration, and that's pretty much all you need from a good Metroidvania. But when you combine it with this very mysterious story and this really cool visual presentation, you get something that really stands out to me, I think. And the fact that the game is only $20 definitely helps too, because that's, in my opinion at least, pretty cheap for a game of very high quality and a lot of replay value like this because of the way that its skills and combat work and stuff. So yeah, this is definitely a recommend for me. I would say this definitely stands out in the realm of Metroidvanias as being something very different in a lot of ways. And if you're at all a fan of the genre, it's definitely something that I would say you should take a look at. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Worldless so that you can go and check it out. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.